Hey folks, this is Tully and welcome to Game Dev. Today we're going to be taking a so it's part 2. We're second stream of the day. We're continuing on with animation polish. In the first part of the stream, we took a look at the save system. That went pretty well. In fact, I think we can come over here and save system. Is it working? Mostly. It was mostly working. There was some small amounts of bugs, but for the most part, I feel like wasn't too bad. I guess it was 2 hours of work, but a lot of it was just like tedium, not actually like hard problems that needed to be solved. But I'm going to say that the save system is functional for the time being. Thanks for stopping in with the gift sub, Morphus, and I hope you have a good day. All right, so now for animations. We've got a couple of things that I'd like to see resolved, and I think they're all kind of related. So the animation is popping when we run. So if we load into the game, and we can actually kind of see the save system in progress and the value that gives us, because now we're able to load more quickly into certain scenes with all of our abilities and certain aspects of the game set up. But if we run in place, we will see that there's a bit of a flicker as our character moves from these spaces. In fact, I'm curious to see if we go faster movement speed. Yeah, you can still see that flicker effect. And if we go slow movement speed, can we see that flicker? Yeah. It's still very minute. But what I believe to be happening is that for one frame, even though we're holding down the button, we go back to idle. And on that one idle frame, we see them pop back into a full stand and then go back into the run. I think this can be solved relatively easily with essentially a transition frame. I'd also like to fix at a different point though, but I want to point it out that this thing gets kind of muddy when we're moving. Everything about the character and the environment and the tiles moving and the trees, all of this is pixel perfect, but the UI when tracking something like a player or an enemy is still not locked into a perfect pixel position such that we don't get any of these like half pixels and disappearing pixels. Just want to point that out. In fact, maybe we can get a quick shot if I slow this down a real amount. Let's see, I want to have some action points on there as well because it's easier to see. And then we should also document everything when we see it. So if we slow things down and then take a step forward, let's see if we can see the character in a weird state. That's a bit of a weird state. Let's open up PureRef again and let's slap that up into the polish. I think that's going to be maybe medium difficulty, so we'll put it in here and we'll add a note. UI action pip bar point bar is not pixel perfect. Hope I spelled all that right because I couldn't read at a certain point. And then we select both of these and we're going to just group them together so we can move them around more easily. Okay, so that's another thing we'll need to do, but task at hand. Let's fix the animation. So my first thought is if we add an extra transition animation in the animation tree, we might be able to have it so that we're transitioning from run back to idle for just a few frames. And over those few frames, if the character ends up in a idle frame. No, okay, let's bring up the tree. Let's bring up the tree. It'll be easier to explain if I'm kind of showing it in here. So if we take a look at this massive file is Hero's animation tree. So we have like the walk in the different directions, the 4 different walks, we'll have 4 different interacts. Essentially every animation is going to have 4 different groups because it's going to have the 4 different trees. This looks like it's pretty complicated, but in reality it's pretty straightforward. I have a tool that I created that reads the JSON data from Aseprite and essentially recreates all of this different tagging inside of Unity's animation tree. And so what's happening is when we finish a walk animation, there's no transition out of walk. Any state can go to any other state. And all the transitions from any state to any state are pretty straightforward. They just essentially just say you can go there. And there's no real issue or timing. It just requires a couple of values to be true. So if we're walking is true and this is the direction we have, we're going to be in this state. And the moment we change our facing, our direction, we'll switch to a different walk via its transition. And when it comes to the idles, which are somewhere in the middle here, they just have a little bit extra logic in here. So we look at an idle has a little bit extra of a exit time, which none of the other ones have. And what that does is it makes it so that if we're in another animation and we go into idle, then the idle will wait for the previous animation to finish playing before we snap to it. So all that being said, relatively simple. Every single one of these transitions is exactly the same, except for the idle, which has a little bit of extra logic, which is causing problems elsewhere, which we'll get to after we fix this problem. But for the actual popping itself when walking, I think if we just add a little transition at the end, that's just a frame or two longer, it should help. Now, let's talk a little bit about how the idle or how the walk actually works, because it'll help explain why a transition would be useful. When we move between tiles, I feel it's very important for the animation to play exactly once. So if we have the character moving between a tile here and this tile here, and we slow the game speed down a bit, we'll see that we go through the full animation of walking one time, all 8 frames. So frame 1, frame 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then we're done. So this 8-frame walk animation gets played perfectly in sync with the motion. And we do this through a little bit of magic with the walk movement script, which is not going to come up here easily because I'd have to spell it correctly, I believe. But hopefully it should come up here. Nope. Movement? Is it not called walk movement? Okay, well, regardless, here it is. And what this is doing is when we walk, we have a coroutine that's placing the unit in a specific direction, setting the parameter that we want to walk, and then setting the animator update speed to 0. So the animator will not change frames because it is at a speed of 0. And from there, it figures out the length of that animation, and it will, over a while loop inside of this coroutine, move forward the delta time of that animation with a set amount of update here. Okay, so I guess update 0 is actually just an initial walk to get us in, or initial call to get us into the walk. This speed 1 versus speed 0 is where we're actually pausing the animation. I misspoke, I misremembered. But this is just getting us one tick forward to be in the first frame of the animation, and then this here is what's pausing the speed. So it's speed 1, we call update with a delta time for this amount of iteration that we want to go through for this frame, and then we set the speed back to 0. And then we also take that lerp amount and we lerp our position between the start of the first tile and the center of the target tile we're going to by that amount of lerp as well. So this will also transition us perfectly. And then when we're done, we return to normal. So when we walk between 2 tiles, we perfectly play the animation. So why are we seeing a pop? Well, it's because I think there's like 1 frame after when we finish where even though we're holding down the button and we're saying, okay, start another run, it doesn't get to this set parameter frame at the same time. In fact, we can look at that to validate that assumption. So here is where we say that we are on this frame calling walk, If we go look at the ability select, combat ability select in the Infinite Retries project, there should be a directional input in here. And in this here, we're processing whether or not we can move to the next tile over. And if we can, we grab this, the navigation ability, which will be our movement, and we perform that ability info on that current unit with a set of targets, which is basically the direction that we're moving the character. And that direction comes from up here, which is from the direction vector that we have pushed on the D-pad. So if we have this moving call, we should be able to see that this frame should ideally be the same frame as this frame on the walk. And that means that there is no difference, like it's happening at the same time. The moment we hold down the thing is the same moment that we say for the animation update. And I think, even though it's happening on the same frame, behind the scenes, the animation system still for one frame switches to the idle movement. Let's see if we can validate that. So this is going to be a little tricky because we have a lot of spam, but if I hold down this button, we should see the moment that we get to the end here, a bunch of stuff happens. Okay. So we initiate the walk here. We say we're moving, which is the moment that it detects the D-pad, and here we say we're walking, same frame. And then down here we have the walk complete on frame 127, and here we have the walk bool for the animation is being set to false. If we look for moving, that is also on frame 127. So the moment that we say walk is complete here on 127, we are still moving here and we are still calling walk and setting all of the parameter information and setting walk to true. That being said, we are seeing that this frame is happening slightly before. This is happening inside of the animation system, which comes from walk movement, right? So on the final frame, we set the walk to false. So there is a one frame difference where we're in that idle. Now, if I try and move this out, which I have done in the past, and make it so that this isn't part of this chunk of code, but is happening down here at walk complete, which is essentially outside of this while loop, we run into a different issue where the walk is still true for an extra frame longer than it needs to be. Which causes the animation system, after we say speed 1, to update us to one more frame forward in the walk. And because of the thing I said earlier where the idle waits for the previous animation before interrupting it, if we move this line here to be outside here, what we would expect, or what I'm pretty sure I remember happening, is we will see the character walk in place when moving to a new tile. Because they don't, like if we don't hold down the key but let go sooner, the character will get to that final tile and then walk will still be true for one extra frame, causing it to loop the animation and play it all the way through again. Here we go. So we're gonna load this. And now I think if I just tap the down button to walk one space. Yeah, we walk in place sometimes on the extra tile. So we're kind of running into this problem where either we do it right here, we set it false here, or we set it false after. I'm aiming for the setting it false immediately so that we don't accidentally loop into the animation twice. But that means that there is a chance that at the end of the animation, if we are continuously walking, that we'll end up with one frame of the idle, which is that pop we're seeing. So there's two paths forward. Two pretty different paths. Path number one is we try in code somehow to predict whether or not you're going to be moving again, even though we aren't at that part of the code yet. And we determine here whether or not we should be setting false or not preemptively ahead of the actual input call from the screen system. That feels a bit hacky to me. Option two is we set up another animation state for transition from walk to idle, which is just one frame, which doesn't have to be very long. It could even be like 10 milliseconds or 15 milliseconds or some small number, such that when we finish walking, we will hold on the final frame of the walk animation for maybe a frame. And then we return to the idle. But that would be long enough to not have us trigger and redo the walk animation all the way through again. I guess there's technically a third option. Which is trying to figure out some other path. I'm gonna feel real silly if this is it, but mentally trying to work it out in my head, maybe what we're supposed to do is if we're over the elapsed time, maybe we're not supposed to update the animator. So that the one frame before, we don't actually call update, but we return the animation speed to 1 afterwards, but we're not calling it manually. Does this work? And then if we get to the screen and it tells us to walk, it'll get back into here immediately and then update. I think there's a possibility of some weirdness with this still too. I think this might be better. I think this might be an improvement, but I think this might still cause some animation weirdness. It's hard to fully explain. Sorry. But if we think about it like a timeline, so if we make a new a new wireframe. And we name this new wireframe animations. If we think about it as like a timeline, I'm just gonna use this text input field. Actually, there's got to be like a container. No. Progress bar? So essentially what I'm doing now is I'm making it so that we get right to the very end of that animation, right at this level, and the walk does not trigger its end frame going to idle. Instead, we're going to leave it with just a section of time left right at the end. But I think what will happen then is that when we move to the next level and we go to the next frame of the walk, because we're setting it false here but leaving it at the sliver amount, if we come back in and walk is still true, there'll be a little bit of time left over. Okay, let's see what happens. But I think with that little bit of time left over, we could run into, if I make this bigger too so it's easier to see, with that little bit of time left over, it means that like you might get the next animation not being perfect. So right now it perfectly plays out the length of the walk animation. But if we set it to false and leave a little bit of extra time at the end, then when we start the next walk, it won't realize we're wanting to start a new section or a new fresh instance. It'll just know that we were still in walk and it'll leave us with that amount remaining. So we'll start a little bit offset of where we should be. We'll see if this does even what I think it does. So no weirdness when tapping forward. We still get the popping. Not all the time though. It is still there though. Okay. So I think we're just playing with like fire a little bit. Yeah, I feel like trying to precisely control the animation is possible here from the animator, but at some point the animator's doing a bunch of work inside of it, which we just don't know like all of the code that's happening inside of Unity's system. So I can't be 100% sure that when I call update like 0, what that's doing. And by the same idea, I can't be 100% sure if setting speed to 1 and updating by delta time, like whether or not this is even valid. And trying to control it at such a minute level may just be a fool's errand. I want to try a little harder though. I want to see, before I go through the work of creating all the transition animations, I just want to explore this idea a little bit more. So what is the frame that we set it to false? I guess we already know that because we have a debug command inside of here, and that's what we were seeing. So it's the frame before. So on frame, it was like frame 26 or something, 401 to 2.6. We were setting this to false. And then on the following frame, we were setting it back to true. I don't think we need any of this code anymore. And then we know that it calls complete after this loop is over. But there is a time skip here. What happens if we move it to outside with the update not happening on the final frame? What impact does that have? I'm not seeing any animation weirdness. I'm not running in spot once we get to the other tile. I'm not... Oh, there's the popping. It's way better, way less frequent, but it still does happen occasionally. Yeah, I feel like trying to minutely control it like this is going to be really difficult. All right, let's try something else. So instead of... Right now, walk is looping, right? If we look at the parameter for walk, it is a loop parameter. So once we click this button, it will stay walking continuously forever. We could change it to be a trigger, so it plays the animation one time all the way through. But I don't think that really helps us, because we kind of want it to stay looping if we set the parameter quick enough. Why is it better now, but like not perfect? I guess that could be frame rate hitches, because we're setting it to false, but we should be setting it to true again before the animation system gets a chance to update, I would think. What if we don't update the speed until a frame later? I think this has the problem of potentially almost having like a threading issue where like we could get in and set the frame speed to 0, but then a later walk movement sets it back to 1. But I'm curious to see what happens if we just delay for a frame. This is pure intuition. I'm not necessarily fully thinking this all the way through. Just it feels like this should work or have a better impact. No, same thing, if not worse. Yeah, it's completely... So we saw it there. The walk was set to true here at... $4.055. Set to false. Walk complete was set to 4.054. We don't get to moving until 55, so there's still a 1 frame difference. Oh, interesting. So in the situations where this breaks, from the moment we set it to false, the difference now is walk complete is happening on the same frame, but there's still a 1 frame delay. Does the screen system not appear until the walk is fully done? That may be a true statement. Okay, we're going to try and walk, and then if we see a difference, we'll dig into it. If we see a pop in the walk animation, we'll dig into the logs. Okay, so we're walking. There was one there. So moving at 241. False set to 241. Okay. So I'm pretty sure I saw a pop there on that frame. On the frame before. We could go slower, slow down the game a bit and see whether or not we see it here. Should be more noticeable. There was definitely a pop. Okay, so we're going to stop moving. Let's read the logs here. So the stop moving happened, walk complete at 2,245 frames. The last true was here at 34. Walk at 34. Walk value set to false on 34. So on the same frame, we both set it to false and we set it to true. But even though they were both set at the same time, we still seen the pop of the idle. Does that mean that the animation update system is happening in between these two? I guess technically this one is happening on a coroutine, and this one, setting it to true again, is happening during an input process event. So I suppose it's possible that in between that, the animation system updates. And that would be the reason to leave the animator speed at 0 so it doesn't update in between. But then we need to set it at some point. again, I'm just trying stuff here, but if we just make a new enumerator for reset speed, and let's just say that has no parameters associated with it, it just updates this unit's animation speed back to 1. And then we just start a coroutine, but we don't yield for it. We just say, hey, at the end here, we're going to just start a coroutine for reset speed. Okay. And then we're not going to reset the speed here. And then we're going to wait 1 frame before doing it. But we're not going to block the walk the walk traversal system so that we can still get to the screen instantaneously. Do we still see the pop? So this is the same idea I was just trying a second ago, but with the realization that, like, I think if I yield within the walk function, it pauses a frame before we get to input. But now we're going to start a coroutine and basically like be like, hey, we're going to continue, we're non-blocking, but we're going to still say that after a frame later, that's when we'll set the speed. And that seems to work perfectly. And the pop is gone. The question is, can this cause weirdness with like running in spot or some sort of like animation getting out of control? I don't know. But this intuitively makes sense to me that, like, hey, if the reason that we're seeing a pop is between the coroutine that sets it false for the walk animation and the input system sending the message that we're going to keep moving, the animator updates, then just not setting the animator back to a speed of 1 on the same frame, but waiting a frame until after we've figured out whether or not the input is going to come in would fix it. And it does. But again, I have a little bit of a gut feeling that there may still be a bug here where on the following run or the following walk, it's going to be slightly behind. If we remove this chunk of code, does it go back to popping occasionally? Because that's the reason that it might be slightly behind. Lorenzo Game Dev. It's going pretty good. We're trying to fix a small sprite animation pop where if we're holding down the run button, we're going back to idle in between the walk start of 1 frame and the walk end of the previous frame and the walk start of the next frame. So there's just a single frame that's bothering me. And I think we fixed it, and now I'm just trying to make sure that I'm not introducing any additional bugs that may be harder to find in the future. But this looks good as well. Okay, so I think the fix then is we don't set the animation walk parameter to false until after we've exited the while loop that's updating the animator. And this while loop last thing it'll do will be setting the speed back to 0, but we don't immediately set it back to 1. We're going to start a coroutine and yield for 1 frame. And this gives time between this coroutine ending, and the ability select screen getting the input that we're going to keep moving, which will then call to this and set the walk parameter back to true again. So we just need to give it, we don't want the animator to update at all in between this call and this call. And so to have that be frame perfect and to not have it update, we just need to wait once. And then the only potential issue is by delaying this return to speed to 1 by 1 frame, that might cause other issues. But again, I'm not seeing any problems with this. Oh, we are seeing the run in place. Okay, so I think that was the last thing we did, which was this needing to be in the else statement. Okay, so I think we found it. Lorenzo Game Dev says, careful when using strings for animations. Those are insidious. So those aren't directly the animations. Those are parameters. So that is setting a specific ID parameter. So we're trying to get out the parameter ID, and then we're setting an integer or bool or float parameter based off of its ID value. Which these might be able to be set with IDs instead. Suppose that's fair. Or integer IDs. Yeah, I suppose these could be just numbers instead of strings. But I'm not entirely sure how to do that, actually, because even if I was to put this in as a number, I think it would still be a string in the back end. Perfect. That's fair. Could be using a parameter instead of a direct string for those. So at the top of walk, we could have a parameter for that. I tend not to go down that level of like parameter creation. Partly because a lot of these are not done in hard-coded ways. This is mostly here. Most of the time it's design data entry. So if we take a look at the shove, for example, which we modified yesterday, we usually do animations via a ability effect component, which takes the name of the parameter you want to use. And not all characters will have the same animations, so we can't have a set drop down here for this. Again, I totally agree, but for other existing constraints, I tend to use strings. It's one of those things where I feel like it's more of an issue if you're working in a group project, but if you're working solo, or at least in my experience working solo, I've never really had too much issue with strings. That being said, I do convert a lot of my strings to integer hashes, just for memory, but although I've heard recently that I had someone tell me that converting things to integer hashes in map tables doesn't even have that big of a performance increase. I'm not seeing any other issues. Okay, so I think we may have resolved it. It feels a bit hacky, but okay, let's walk through it one more time. So when we call walk movement, which in turn is called from the move to tile sequence step, which is generated by the ability, but basically we say, hey, on this step we're going to move the character to a target tile. We give it the tile we want to go to. The movement system, depending on whether it's a walk movement, a jump movement, will then handle getting to that tile. For us specifically with the walk function, we're going to set the parameter for walk. We're going to set the animator to update with 0. So this is going to cause the animator to update instantly with 0 delta time. So it should snap us from idle to the beginning of the walk. We're going to get the length of the animation. We are then going to while loop through our coroutine, so we're not blocking, and get the delta time each frame. And we're going to determine how much delta time that is, and we're going to apply that to the animator by setting the speed to 1, updating the animator with the amount of delta time for this frame, and then setting the animator back to 0, so it will not update on its own. We're effectively having it paused outside of this moment where we update it manually, and then we determine a lerp based off the elapsed time divided by the animation length, and then we move the character, the actual move, based off of that lerp amount that we have. And once this is finished looping through and the elapsed time is greater than the animation length, we're going to set the delta time one more time. We're going to finish moving the character, but we're not going to update the animation because this can cause us to tick over, depending on floating point errors, into the idle, which is the pop we're trying to get rid of. So we won't update the animation if we're past the animation length. We will set the animation to false, and we will not immediately inline set the speed, but instead we will kick off a coroutine that will set the animator speed back to normal 1 frame after, giving us time that if our ability select screen so chooses, ability select select screen, if we get into here, we might have an input being processed, and that input process will grab the movement ability. Given that movement ability, it will then perform it with a specific direction that we're facing. And that will eventually get right back down to the walk movement through a whole line of code where it will get here and it will set the walk back to true before the animator ever had its speed modified. And so we will never get to the idle animation unless it's been at least 1 frame of you not pushing the button, which I can't control that. That's much harder to do. So if we come in here, and the player like tap moves, they can still kind of get a little bit of that poppy action depending on how well they tap. That we could still add a transition in between frame to try and smooth that out, but I'm far less concerned about that than you holding down the button and the characters popping every time they move between tiles. Yeah, this feels fixed to me. There are further polish and improvements we can do to fix like tapping, but in terms of like holding the button, the animation is now doing what I would expect. Cool. I'm gonna say that's done. What else did we have on the docket for animations? Slide in, no walk animation when moving between rooms. Let's see if we can figure out how to solve that. Okay, so we're running fine. We get to the end of the room. And we slide into this room. But if we walk back this way, we walk in. We come in here. Oh, we walked in there. Okay. So it's not consistent. I think we were seeing this the other day. It is not a consistent problem. So the animation, what's driving that, I guess, is a good question. Also, I think we're seeing a bit of a pop here when we walk in. Could that be part of it? That's a good shot. A good shout. It could shout, whatever. The point is, Lorenzo says in Twitch chat, it could be only on new rooms. It does look like it could be related to entering a new room. That would explain the inconsistency. Yeah. Okay. So what is different about entering a new room versus entering a room you've already been in? I think the way we reveal tiles is handled differently. That's a great shout. Thanks for that one. I don't think I would have come to that one as quickly. Also a good call out, the tile behind him isn't generated either. I don't know if that should be as much of a problem. That's more of a problem with, again, the way we transition for sure. But even here, when the tile isn't revealed yet, because when we turn around it doesn't reveal either. If we walk back in, I think we still walk in okay. So also a bug, but not the problem. Also the popping while walking in is also really interesting. So we've solved it for walking between tiles, but there's still a pop as we walk in to the main room. And I think that's the way that we're handling it is different as well. Okay, one thing at a time. Let's dig into how the heck do we load in between rooms again. Let's go take a look at the dungeon. And let's look at the scene, and we'll go to the one we're seeing it in is Dungeon Room 2. So if we go into the scene view, exit out of 2D because we're not doing UI stuff now. Oh, I turned off gizmos the other day because they were being annoying. Okay, so if we look here, this is a transition tile. So when we step on this tile, it causes us to move to a different scene with a different spawn point, with a different screen and a certain transition. This is the tile we spawn on. And that tile has a ability associated with it. So when the character is placed on this tile, this ability will play. And what does this ability do? Well, it reveals board intro ability effect. What is this thing doing? Well, it's creating a sequence step to reveal the board. And that calls spawn revealed tiles. Okay. Is this blocking? Does not look to be. Yeah, this is not a blocking effect. So this is just going to happen. And we're not going to pause on this step. And then when we spawn these, we have a debug spawn all, which is great. But if we have a... If not, we spawn them here. But that's only going to spawn revealed tiles that were saved as revealed. So this will happen. All this other stuff won't happen until the reveal. Okay, so what's happening here is we reveal everything that's already been revealed in that room or in that room that starts revealed. So some of the goddess statues stay revealed all the time. But when we enter, we also look around, basically. We look at the tiles in front of us, front left, front right. And then here, this is looking at the tiles we're standing on. As well as two to the left of us and two to the right of us. So the reason we're not getting the tiles behind us is simply that we're not doing basically row -1, so we're not looking to see if there's anything behind us. So we could do -1 here. And I could name these objects a little cleaner, but it's fine. We have -1 and 1, and that should reveal the tiles behind us as we walk in. Maybe we need to see the tiles before we try and fade in and do any of this offset and walk animation stuff. What are these ones doing? These are just a slightly delayed set in front of us that we wait a little longer with a bit of a delay amount so that we get more of a fun, like, tiles bounce in effect for the ones that are a little further out as we're walking into them. So it feels like the character's revealing them as they step onto that tile. So we have 2 sets of tints. This is with a duration of 0 setting the alpha to 1? Okay. So these first set are more just defaulting us to specific positions. So this is pushing us back 1. And then object position reset is just putting us back to where we started. And then this is fading us back up again, removing the tint on the character. Ah, okay. And this one, with this walk animation, is just playing this walk animation continuously until we get to this step where we turn it off. And then we make sure to reset the tint afterwards. Back to white. Okay. Well, let's try moving the tile sight reveal effect up. I feel like that could be related, but it's also very possible that that has nothing to do with it. Because the first set shouldn't really matter. I would also think that we'd see errors if there was like major problems with this. Yeah, no, that's it. That looks to be the problem. I'm going to start a new game from boot screen just to kind of test all avenues. But I guess we just need to reveal the tiles via our sight ability effects before we try and like place the character anywhere or trigger any of the animations. Let's go core boot. I mean, that's a much easier problem to solve than I thought it was going to be. I'd still like to take a look at what's going on with the walk animation popping. Yeah, that looks better. Actually, are we still seeing the animation pop? Yeah, we are. Okay. Let's slow it down. Slow the game speed down. Huh. We're walking in. That seems to be that it's like snapping to the idle, even though the bool is set to true every frame. Like, walk should be true the whole time. We can... let's see, parameter. Walk value true. Oh, interesting. Oh no, these are much larger numbers. This is 1,000 different between these. This is 200 between these. Okay, so it doesn't look like it's intermittent. We can clear and see if we get... We should only see one true here. We did get a false in between. Interesting. I didn't think we were using movement to move the character. I thought we were doing a bit more of a hack, but that seems to imply that we were walking. Are we doing both? Are we both walking and transitioning out of the scene? What is happening? Yeah, we're getting a flicker of false true. So this is coming from the... Let's just pause. I want to process this. This is coming from the walk movement as well. Okay, let's... Okay, tile, enter. Enter... Transition. Enter scene, which... will be a little different from exit scene. We should probably look at both of them. This is doing a bit of magic. Unlockable characters, I see the hydrate request. So I would expect that we should see console parameters. We should see console parameters for not the movement system, but yeah, animation parameter, okay, okay. So that's right. But when we're leaving, we saw walk movement, animation parameter sequence step, setting it to true. Oh, I suppose that actually makes sense. Because when we're leaving a space, we first have to walk to the tile we're going to leave on. And then once we fully enter that tile, we play the ability to leave, basically. So what we're seeing is we set the animation to true, we set it to false, and then on the same frame, the animation parameter is setting it back to true again. That implies we shouldn't be seeing any popping, though. And indeed, we're not. So walking out of a scene is fine. Is it walking into a scene that becomes an issue? Yes, it's the walk in. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything wrong with that. Yeah, it's the walk in. Okay, I'm seeing it on the walk in, not the walk out. Okay, so we speed through this part, and then we slow it down here. A bunch of animation stuff was set. It looks like we set the animation to true here. Oh, that's fair. So the moment we set it to false was when we saw the pop. Is that right? That feels like it could be right. So we set animation to true here. Watching for any console ads. Anything happening with the console. Okay, going really slowly. Is there a pop here at any point? There. There was not a console at that moment, though. Why are you snapping to a weird animation if your parameter is set to true and it never gets modified? I'm going to let it finish, but then we're going to try manually ticking the bool and see what happens then. Okay. Now we'll click on the scene. Okay. Click on hero. Click on animations. We're going to bring this down here so that we can see this more easily. Yep. Okay. So even though walk is set to true constantly, at some points it snaps to a different animation. We're going to go frame by frame. We're going to zoom in here because the animator is smart enough to... Yeah, it snapped to idle for just one frame. Why? No, that makes sense, actually. Oh my goodness. Okay. I think... How do you choose the animation? Essentially this. So Unity's animator, I just set one of these parameters and I let the transitions handle it, basically. And that seems to be the problem here, is that really this should have a... If we should only transition to idle if walk is false, or any of these other ones are false, I think is the problem. So what's happening is it's seeing... Even though this is true the whole time, there's still a frame where it goes to idle because it's, I guess, sooner in the order. And then this transition of walk true is valid. So then it transitions out of idle into the walk. So it's just happening to hit the idle sooner. But I think we should never go to idle. All these other ones are set up in such a way that they will only be entered if their condition is set or their trigger is set. And I guess triggers we care a whole lot less about, because a trigger, once it's hit, we expect it to go back to idle afterwards because it's immediately set and then unset. But anything that's looping, we should not be entering into. Anything that's a looping parameter should be blocking us from being able to enter back into the idle. Sorry, Lorenzo, does that explain how I'm choosing them? Essentially, I have a bunch of systems in place that just like toggle this animator's parameters, and then I let the animation tree system just handle going to whichever animation should be right, which does yield these types of bugs, but essentially, as long as the conditions are set up correctly, it'll just figure out where it should be based off which parameters are set. And I do it very simply. You can do this way more in more complex ways. I'm mostly using the parameters as essentially a play animation button. Parser. We need the animation parser. Animation parser for... this one? No, that's the parameter. How do I bring in animations again? There's a special command script that I have. Helps if I could spell. Okay, well, we'll do it this way. I don't remember what I called this thing. Oh, it's off screen. Find, replace. Animation. Anim sprites. Is there space in there? There was not. No? Okay. We're going to be that way, are we? Let's just look for parsers. Ability parser, character parser, encounter parser, zone, quest. Why am I failing to find this? Splice sprites? Animation sprites? Anim sprite processor. Oh my goodness. Okay. So this is my special script that essentially goes through and reads the ASprite JSON file that I exports with my sprite sheets, and then manually generates all of the anim clips for me, and then creates a animation tree with all of the transitions, so that I can just re-import as much as I want. Idle clip has the animation here. So we are looking for, I think, death as an example. No. Oh, it's generic. If animation name type value equals bool, then it should be setting that as a not transition for that animation key. So it should be already generating a parameter for walk, but it is not. That's even more fun. So I wrote the code correctly. I did this in such a way that it should be working, but only death is showing up. Animation lookup. My brain is parsing. So when we get animator's conditions by name, inside of here, we loop through all of the state machines. And if it's an idle animation clip, then we give it a has exit time, which is on purpose. Because we want, if we switch to idle, to wait for the previous animation to finish before we go to idle. And then it should have conditions, and those conditions are essentially the transitions. And the conditions should be based off of the name of the object or the animation. And I basically decide here which animations I expect to have which parameters. So if I get a kick, I expect that that will be an if threshold 1, essentially. But if the name of this animation is idle, it should get, if the value of the lookup table is bool, it should add that to its if not set. So why does it not do that for walk, but it does it for death? It feels like this might be an order of operations thing. Because we're going to loop through all the animations. And we're going to add them all here. I have a feeling that idle needs to be at the end of my list. Oh God, okay, I think I remember writing code for this, or making a decision not to write code more accurately, and deciding that idle should always be at the end of the formatted list of animations so that this works. Where do we create those transitions? Get animation conditions by name. This is part of the create animation frame tags. Yeah. 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 Okay. So I used to have walk at the front of the list, but I switched it because Drixie made me a faster moving one. And idle is now... Oh, idle is still here though. So idle is still after the walk, so it should still be working. No, it's not what I think it is. So it's not an order of animations problem. Okay. I'm going to start debugging. I can't intuit it just by reading the code right now. I'm a little too drained. Okay. Let's go into Unity. Let's do tools, anim sprites. It's thinking. Okay. So we're going to loop through all the animations. The problem is we're going to be seeing a lot here that isn't just hero. So I guess we kind of need to go up a level, and we need to see which animation we're doing right now. We're currently operating on the bat. So we're going to need to do... think like this. Okay, which sprite are we operating on now? Slime. Okay, don't care about slime right now. Now we're importing the void bat. Can skip that. Now we're importing the goddess character. Can skip that. Now we're importing hero with all 225 frames. I did write code for this. We processed the idle animation last, so bool parameters, it's not needed to transition on are created. And then here, if it is an idle frame, then we add it to this list that will process second. So in fact, we should be able to skip all of this and come down here, and this should be the one, the southwest and northwest idle. Okay. So we are coming into here. We're going to generate a new animation. I'm going to make sure I don't miss it. We eventually come all the way down to here. And here. And we're going to try and check whether or not this list contains counts. It does. It has death. Where is walk? Run. It's a trigger. We're not using run, we're using walk. Why is walk not in this list? This list should contain all of the other animations. Cast, hit, death, dizzy. But it's missing the walk animation. Which is here. Okay, we're going to also check on the actual data, which does have southwest and northwest walk. Shove, kick, idle, get up, magic cast, violin, effect. Oh. Are we missing walk in here? Walk is there. Oh, we're about to see whether or not we will need dynamic names. I think we're missing walk in this list. I think run got added, but walk got missed. And this list of names is essentially all the animations I expect, because creating a list to dynamically figure that out was going to take me like a day or two. Walk is in this one. It was just missing from there. Okay. So now if we come back into here, wait for Unity to process the changes we've made. And then we do animations, build sprites. And then we take a look at the idle. It's still missing walk. Okay, so that isn't the only problem. All right, debug, attach debugger again. Okay, these are the frames and the animations I want. It is thinking for a very long time. Maybe we should stop the debugger and try again. Okay, there we go. So let's add a watch here for sprites. And we are waiting until we find hero, which is there. Okay. Now, inside of frame tags, somewhere there should be a walk. Here. Okay, so walk exists. So then let's put a breakpoint on this line where we would add them. Okay, we're going to add a watch to this parameter name. And we are going to minimize this one. So this is run, which is the first one, which makes sense. We are hitting run a lot. Okay. Frame tag. We care about the name. So you're waiting for this one to say walk. Okay, so this is the walk. Let's put a breakpoint down on where we add it to the list, which is somewhere around here. And we're gonna work our way down in to these. This is fine. We're skipping over a lot of this stuff. When we get to here, this is not a looping animation. Okay, yep. So at some point, my naming formatting got broken. Anything that's a looping animation is supposed to contain the word loop in its tag name in Aseprite. And at some point when working back and forth with Drixie, we lost that. And without that loop tag in its name, it doesn't know it's a looping animation. What makes that weird or odd is that we do know it's a looping animation in its condition. How do we know walk is a bool? Because we do that specifically for this one. Well, how does Death know to add to make its parameter a bool instead of a trigger? Yes, that is correct, unlockable characters. So the summary is that I wrote a bunch of code to solve this problem, but that code was dependent on a specific naming structure for the tags on the Aseprite animation tags. Like, these things here have to have the word looping in it in order for them to be treated properly by my import system. And at some point when working, like, I'm not trying to blame Drixie, but like when working back and forth, Drixie tends to just name them more simply. And that got infected into the norm naming format. It's fine. It's okay. So this is on me, to be very clear. It was on me to remember that this mattered and to validate that when the animations came in, that they were set up correctly for my system to import them. And I lost track of a piece of code that is a bit silly and a bit hard-codey, but here's the problem, chat, is at some point you have to input the data somewhere. I recognize hard-coded strings are bad in spots. 100%. I understand that, like, embedding functionality into the tags of these names is also somewhat bad. If not maybe very bad, considering it cost me an hour today. But at some point you have to put the data somewhere. Something has to say this animation is looping versus this animation is not looping. And I feel like it makes sense to be in the A-Sprite section. But working on this project as a hobby, it's very easy to lose track of this stuff. Reasonable decisions made in the moment, but being forgotten. Okay, so you're right. Yeah, it is just adding underscore looping to the end of the animation name should validate whether or not this works. I'm just in my own pit of despair right now. I'm mostly curious why I would expect that this should not have been set to a parameter of type bool. It should have been a little circle like this trigger one. And I'm a little confused on why it's getting that value. It's retroactive. I don't... Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to test this and then we'll fix it. I'm pretty sure I don't recreate the animations every time. I only edit the files as they are. So if I delete hero animation controller, delete that object, then we do anim sprites. No, it's not. It is recreating it with the bool square tick box thing. So this one is because of this parameter. So we're hard coding walk to be a bool. Or if it's a looping animation. Is that right? Why is this separate? If we add... I would expect we would see an error where we get walk twice in here. Okay, we're going to try it. We're going to try adding looping in here, but I still think there's something else I'm missing. Like, I did add this loop logic, but now I'm starting to wonder if, like, walk is special cased in some extra way that I'm forgetting. I will say that this tool saves me a ton of time. We're able to get a lot of like animations in very quickly. We're able to edit them. Like yesterday we added shove and like we were able to modify its timing through Aseprite very quickly and easily. Like the tool itself is powerful. There's just clearly a major issue. Or sorry, there is a small bug. It's not even a major issue. It's just a small bug, but it's just annoying to try and figure out. Oh, fun. We went back to Ward. That's because we hard code that value, which is why we don't recreate it every time. Well, hard code is maybe a strong word. Actually, it's already set there. Why did it load up with Ward and no animations? Yeah, I can't move. We do have an error. Oh, we have a search still hidden. Yeah, it's can't find the runtime animation controller. Yeah, it's missing here. IT 3D player. IT 3D. Unity seems very confused. Yeah, I did delete it, but I'm just very confused on why it's not, like, accepting it when I re-add it. It's, like, treating it as broken still. Yeah, see, walk shows up twice now. Okay, that's working. Yeah, I mean, that's importing correctly, so adding looping did work, but it still brings up questions of why there was a default version of it here. It feels like I fixed a bug incorrectly at some point. Oh. Yeah, okay, I think I see. I think I missed it a moment ago, but I think if we undo these changes, just to kind of show the difference. Modify the data back. Wow, that's a real fun bug. If we anim sprite this again. So great. Yeah, so we had hard-coded walk into the system. Unlockable characters, you're probably not wrong, because at some point we had hard-coded all of these, but I had set up a system to actually like keep track of and add everything based off of its animation type, basically. But you're probably right that at some point walk and direction were defaulted because of the way that the RPG Era of Ember stuff was set up. And this created a bug where when we lost looping, we didn't notice it because there was already a walk default parameter. And the system still used that and could tell that we were trying to walk, but because there was two parameters with the same name, it had no idea that walk trigger versus walk bool were different. There are walk loops down here. I think those are from re-importing a couple of times now, but yeah. And because this is generated code, I wouldn't have saw a problem like this. And I just didn't notice with all of these names here that the walk was showing up twice. Okay, so yeah, the problem is that this is bad code here. This doesn't need to be here anymore. It's probably a leftover from a time before, and it was hiding the bug, which was that I had solved the problem to make it so idle didn't snap by adding the term looping to the walk to make sure that the system knows not to interrupt it with the idle. And then death gets a bit of a special case, but that's because death animations require it to kind of not loop, but also clamp forever at the end, so they remain on the final frame. But yeah, for the most part, anything that's looping and we don't want idle to interrupt it just needs to have the loop tag on its animation frame. And I had forgotten that fact and hadn't noticed it, and it wasn't an immediate bug because of the fact that we had an extra stray walk being added when it didn't need to be. And then we had a trigger version of walk and a looping version of walk, and everything was okay. And it was only noticeable specifically on transitions because we set it to be a loop continuously walk effect when we walk in, instead of having it be a perfect animation from frame 1 to 8 when walking between tiles. Oh, the rabbit holes have been intense the last 2 days. The rabbit holes have been intense. Let's add looping back in here. We still have it in Aseprite as well. Let's reanimate the sprites. Now there's one walk. I don't think we need these. We're going to delete everything, but not delete the controller. And then rebuild. Yeah, it's not regenerating those walk ones. And then these are called walk loop now, which I think is fine. Idle has only if death and walk are false, which is what we want. And now we just want to make sure the game doesn't break. I think what's most sad about this is realistically, I think I want to probably change the way that we walk in as well, because the whole walk in is kind of awful. Because unlike the tile movements, you can kind of get that walk in place at the end. Because it's not being handled properly to animate exactly. But this bug should still have been fixed, just in case we ever want to truly do something with looping in the same way. Perfect. Yep. Okay. We solved it. Okay. Recoup. Rebuild. We are no longer sliding between animations, but sliding in with no walk animation between rooms. And we no longer have an animation pop while running. Those two things have been resolved. This one here is going to go back up into the polish section because I don't think we're going to get to it today. I would like to dig a little further into this before we call it truly done and see, is it possible to have the run animation be handled somewhat like the tile movement so that we don't get into this like run in spot? Mark. I need to mark on the mic stand at some point how high up I need it. All right. So running out looks okay because obviously we fade out at some point, so we don't get to see any run in place. But this one, less so. Now, is it possible that rather than reworking the whole system, we might just be able to change the duration a little bit? How long is the animation? ...320 milliseconds. I think that might just fix it. It's not a perfect fix, but it does make all that work we did figuring out what was going on with the looping animations more worthwhile. Yeah, that looks better. It's not perfect, or as perfect as the normal movement, but I don't think it has to be. If you hit like a lag spike in this system, I think you could run in spot for a little while. And holding the button so that we move continuously doesn't look like it breaks either. So if we hold the button, we're going to walk in naturally and then just keep running. Yeah. Okay. I think we solved that pop. Which again, was mostly just realizing that we already had solved it a while ago and re-remembering and relearning how our systems work. Okay. Which I also feel like is a little bit of what we did yesterday with the ability stuff. There was the same level of like, well, how do abilities work and why is targeting not working the way I want it to? It's just this relearning, which it's week one. We're week one on this road. Once we get through a couple more of these problems, I think we'll have a better understanding. And if we can maintain and keep this in our heads, we should be in a better spot. At some point, I would like to document a lot of my own systems so that we don't run into these problems as much, but at some point, it is what it is. It's still pretty valuable, to be clear. The fact that I was stuck on this is annoying, but the amount of time that the system has saved me overall is still quite high. And therefore is still worth it in my eyes. Even if occasionally it does cause me some amount of pain and suffering. Okay. This is good. Let's talk about one more quick thing. Specifically, I want to go back to yesterday's stream a little bit and try and overview some stuff that came up at the end. When we were doing bugs and polish yesterday, we were mostly focused on trying to solve a issue with the shove animation executing when there was no target. That ended up taking us 2 hours. But what it ended up being really was just me not fully remembering how the shove system works, and more accurately realizing that there were some innate bugs and problems with the way shove was being built. Primarily, the thing that's a little confusing is that when we select a fine unit by tile offset, inside of here, we're going to switch this up to this one. Inside of here, we check and grab a unit, and we end up setting a unit and setting like preview tiles. And other ability effects, like, or mainly the other type of ability effect is selecting a tile rather than the first one was find unit, this one's find tile. And what was confusing, and I had forgotten, is that when we do this find tile, we actually set the target tile, or at the time it was named just set tile, and that tile would change. And we would be able to, when we reposition and like try and find the next tile forward, I wasn't remembering or keeping track of the fact that that tile changes depending on previous tile selects being called. So we've done a couple of small edits since yesterday's stream. Number one of the other things that we were dealing with was the fact that when we would point an ability towards a tree, it would preview underneath that tree tile, even though you shouldn't be able to use that ability there. So it would show blue underneath this tree essentially, or underneath the like goddess statue. And so in order to solve that, we have set it up now so that there is a is valid preview tile effect, which essentially checks to see whether or not the tile in question is null or if it's a valid type of tile. And if it's not a valid type of tile, then we set the property to 0 and we set the preview tile to null. And then before we go do any of our other logic, we just make sure that we have a valid preview tile. Again, this only happens in, or I should mention that this only happens in predicting. For preview stuff, if we're actually applying the construction, we don't care if it's a valid preview. We just say, yeah, we're good, and we move on. So that kind of gets rid of that effect of like targeting a tree and seeing like some stuff underneath of it, even though it isn't a valid target. The other thing that I've done is I've made it so that when we find a tile by tile offset, we can use the origin tile, which I think helps make it a little more clear when we're targeting via a tile versus an offset from our original position. So if we use the origin tile, we can grab the origin tile from where our character started the ability. Otherwise, if we use the target tile, which is the default behavior, that's going to be whatever, that could be modified by other ability effects, and it's kind of like a cursor on the map and can change throughout. And that requires you to kind of figure out what state it's currently in, which is a bit of a mental math, but it's essentially visual programming, and you just kind of figure it out. That's kind of where I've landed on that. Also, for finding a unit, I've also added a use origin tile because somewhat intuitively this was also using whatever tile that got moved. So this now can also be determined to use the origin tile or the target tile. Not major changes, but just a little bit of cleanup so that at the end of last stream, we were just getting a lot of weirdness when trying to preview this. That has all been taken care of now with a couple of small pieces. I do think there's a larger refactor to the ability system that can still be done. The ability system primarily operates under this idea of it receiving a ability target, which is an interface, and that ability target can be either it's looking at a unit or a tile, or this is not easy to see. Let's do it this way. So essentially, the ability target could be a ability direction target, which is basically taking in a direction value as like, hey, I want to target this way based off of my origin position. Well, it's not finding it easily, so I'm going to go track it down myself. But the other spot you can do it is inside of a tile. So a tile is also technically an interface of an ability target, so you can give an ability a tile as a target. And then finally, a unit is also interfaced as an ability target, so you can give an ability a unit as a target as well. Over time, I've really found that this is kind of cumbersome because we never know what type of target we're hitting, whether it's directional, unit, or tile. And maybe this is okay, but I still think there might be a case to be made that we shouldn't have 3 different types. We should just use this ability direction target, and it should have a target tile, a target unit, and a target direction. And depending on what you're trying to do, you should just build a parameter set for what it is you want to target, and there should be one set of data you pass in as the ability information, and then the ability can use this class to store and keep track of data like the origin and the target tile and preview tiles and all this other information. Because right now some of this stuff doesn't exist in units and tiles, and so some of my abilities wouldn't work in some situations. So I just think as I move more towards this, almost every single one of my abilities right now are essentially just a ability direction target based tile or based ability. I think that everything should just be this. Okay, I wanted to try and get that in at some point today, and that was kind of the last big piece of the puzzle, or piece of the agenda I wanted to talk about, was just some of that ability polish stuff I had done off camera this morning. But the save system we did this morning was good. I'm pretty happy with where the animation polish came to in the end. Again, a little frustrated by the fact that it was something that was already done and I had already solved, and it took me an hour to remember that. But overall, it's functional and we're happy with that. Won't be a stream probably tomorrow or Saturday. I'm going to take those days off to just kind of like think through some design problems and do maybe some paper designing a little bit. And then Sunday we'll come back and we'll probably do the same format we did as today, where we will do 2 hours in the morning from 11 to 1, take a lunch break, and then do another 2 hours from 2 to 4. For now though,